Hello everyone, and welcome. Tonight, we begin somewhere new, a place that feels distant, but not unfamiliar, a place that does not appear on any map, and yet feels as though it has always existed quietly, just beyond where the world is usually seen. There is no need to follow closely, no need to understand everything. Just listen and allow the images to form gently, slowly in your mind. Far beyond the edges of any known road, beyond the hills that most travelers never cross, there rests a small village, hidden, silent, untouched by anything that moves too quickly. The houses are built from old stone, shaped by time, softened by seasons that pass without being counted. Wooden beams stretch across their surfaces, darkened by years, yet still strong, still steady. Small windows sit quietly within the walls, reflecting the sky, holding light during the day and fading into shadow as night approaches. The paths between the houses are narrow, not straight, not planned. They curve gently, naturally, shaped only by footsteps, repeated slowly over generations. No signs, no markings, only the quiet memory of those who have walked them before. During the day, the village feels simple. Children move softly through the paths, not running, not shouting, but existing within the same calm that fills the air. Older villagers sit near doorways, watching not with expectation, but with quiet presence. Nothing rushes here, nothing needs to. Everything exists exactly as it is. At the far edge of the village, beyond the last house, beyond where the path begins to fade, there stands a single lantern, old, tall, made of dark metal, shaped long ago, and left untouched for as long as anyone can remember. It stands beside a narrow clearing where the ground opens slightly, just enough to create space around it. During the day, it is nothing special, unlit, still, part of the landscape. The villagers pass it without stopping, without looking, without thought. It simply exists. But as the day begins to fade, as the light softens, as the sky shifts from pale blue into deeper tones, something begins to change. Not suddenly, not clearly, but gently. The village grows quieter, not because anything stops, but because everything settles. The paths empty, the doors close, the windows darken, not from fear, not from routine, but from something older, something understood without ever being spoken. The air cools, the light fades, and the moment between day and night begins. The lantern remains still, unlit, silent, and then, without flame, without spark, without sound, it begins to glow, softly, barely visible at first. A faint light forming within the glass, as if it appears from nothing, rather than being lit. The glow is not bright. It does not spread far. It does not illuminate the village. It remains contained within the lantern itself, a quiet light that exists without needing to be seen. The villagers know this moment. They always have. Even those who have never been told understand it. When the lantern begins to glow, the village does not move. No one steps outside. No one approaches the clearing. No one speaks. The silence deepens. The world holds. The lantern continues to glow, soft, steady, unchanging. And yet, something about it feels different. Not the light, not the shape, but the presence. As if the lantern is not simply glowing, but existing in a way that is not part of the ordinary world. The first villager stands behind a closed window, not looking directly, not staring, but aware. The light from the lantern reflects faintly in the glass, but the reflection feels deeper, stronger, more real than the lantern itself. The air becomes still, the silence becomes full, and the light continues to glow, not growing, not fading, simply existing. The clearing remains. The lantern continues to glow, unchanged, soft, contained within itself, as if the light does not belong to the world around it. The clearing remains empty. No wind moves through it. No sound reaches it. Even the smallest shift in the air seems to stop before it arrives. The village watches, not directly, not with eyes fixed on the lantern, but with awareness, a quiet sense that something is happening, even though nothing appears to move. The houses remain closed. The doors stay still. The windows reflect only darkness and the faint, distant glow that never spreads. The path that leads to the clearing lies untouched. It curves gently away from the last house, then fades into the open space where the lantern stands. During the day, this path is walked without thought. But now it feels different. Not longer, not darker, but distant, in a way that cannot be measured, as if the space between the village and the lantern has changed. The first villager stands behind the window, breath slow, still, eyes resting somewhere between the reflection of the glass and the presence beyond it. They do not step outside. They do not open the door, because something within them understands that this is not a moment for movement. The lantern does not flicker. It does not pulse. It does not grow brighter or dim. It simply glows, steady, unchanging. And yet, something about the light feels alive, not moving, not shifting, but present in a way that is deeper than ordinary light. The clearing holds it, not reflecting it, not spreading it, just allowing it to exist. The ground beneath the lantern remains still, soft, barely visible in the low light, and yet it feels as though the glow does not rest upon it, as if the lantern is not lighting the ground, but existing apart from it. The villagers feel this, without speaking, without sharing a glance. Each one understands, in their own quiet way, that the light is not meant to illuminate. It is not meant to guide. It is not meant to be followed. It exists for another reason. The silence deepens, not heavier, not darker, but fuller, as if the entire village has settled into a deeper awareness. The sky above has turned completely dark. No stars appear, no moon rises, only the endless, soft darkness that holds the village within it. And in the center of that darkness, the lantern remains. The first villager shifts slightly, not forward, not toward the door, but enough to feel the ground beneath their feet, to feel their own presence within the moment. The reflection in the window changes, not clearly, not in shape, but in depth. The lantern's glow within the glass feels stronger, more defined than the lantern itself, as if what is seen is not what truly exists. The villager notices this, not with surprise, not with confusion, but with quiet recognition. The light does not spread outward. It does not fill the clearing, but it seems to deepen inward, as if the true glow is not in the air, but somewhere else, somewhere unseen. The path remains empty. No step touches it. No movement breaks its surface. And yet, it feels the lantern continues to glow, unchanged, steady, contained within itself, as if the light does not belong to the air, nor to the ground, nor to anything that surrounds it. The clearing remains silent, empty, still. Nothing enters it, nothing crosses it, Even the quiet presence of the night seems to stop at its edge, as if something unseen holds it apart from the rest of the world. The village does not sleep. It rests, each house closed, each window dark, and yet awareness remains, not as attention, not as focus, but as something quieter, something that simply exists. The first villager stands behind the window, still, breathing slowly, eyes open, but no longer fixed on the lantern itself. Something has changed, not in the world, but in the way the world is felt. The light does not spread. It does not touch the ground. It does not reach the path. It does not move outward. And yet, it does not feel distant. It feels deeper. The villager begins to notice this more clearly now. The glow is not extending into the clearing. It is not filling space. It is not illuminating anything beyond itself. Instead, it feels as though it is drawing inward, not shrinking, not fading, but deepening, as if the light does not expand, but opens. The glass of the lantern holds the glow, but it does not contain it. It frames it. The light inside appears soft, calm, unchanged, but something within it feels larger than what can be seen. The reflection in the window shifts again, not in shape, not in brightness, but in presence. The lantern seen in the glass feels more real, more complete than the lantern in the clearing. The villager does not move, but something within them responds. Not action, not thought, but awareness, a quiet recognition that what is seen may not be where the light truly exists. The path remains empty, but now it feels different, not just distant, not just quiet, but deeper, as if it no longer leads through the village, but into something else. The villagers feel it too, not as a shared thought, not as something spoken, but as something understood. The lantern is not lighting the world. It is revealing something else. The air remains still, but it feels closer, more present, as if space itself is no longer empty, but filled with something that cannot be seen. The silence deepens, not darker, not heavier, but more complete, as if it now holds something within it. The villager slowly lowers their gaze, not toward the ground, but toward the reflection in the glass. The lantern's glow within the window feels different, stronger, more defined, more real. The edges are clearer, the depth is greater, and for a moment, it feels as though the reflection is not reflecting the lantern, but showing something else, something behind it, something within it. The villager does not try to understand, does not try to follow. They remain still, and the light continues, unchanging, and yet not the same. The clearing remains untouched. The ground remains dark. The path remains empty, but the presence of the lantern grows, not outward, not into space, but inward, into something deeper, something that cannot be reached by walking, something that cannot be seen by looking directly. The villagers feel this, a quiet shift within the moment, the sense that the lantern is not part of the world in front of them. The lantern continues to glow, unchanged, soft, silent, and yet it is no longer something that simply exists in the clearing. Something about it has shifted, not in form, not in brightness, but in presence. The village feels it. The houses remain still. The paths remain empty. The air does not move. And yet, the sense of where the lantern is begins to change. The first villager stands behind the window, breath slow, body still, eyes open, but no longer searching the clearing, because now The clearing does not feel like the place where the light truly exists. The lantern stands where it has always stood, tall, unmoving, its metal frame dark against the night, its glass holding the same soft glow. And yet, it no longer feels like the source. The reflection in the window deepens, not brighter, not sharper, but more complete. The light within the glass feels fuller, as if it holds more than what is visible outside. The villager notices this without reacting, without questioning, only allowing the awareness to settle. The path remains untouched, but now it no longer feels like something that leads to the lantern. It feels like something that leads away from it, or perhaps something that never truly reaches it at all. The clearing feels distant, not in space, but in reality, as if it exists slightly removed from where everything else is. The villagers feel it, a quiet shift spreading through the village, not spoken, not shared, but understood. The lantern is not where it appears to be. The air grows stiller, if that is even possible. The silence deepens, not heavier, not darker, but more focused, as if everything is gathering into a single point. The villager slowly lifts their gaze away from the clearing and toward the reflection in the window. The lantern within the glass does not behave like a reflection. It does not sit on the surface. It does not mirror perfectly. It feels deeper, as if the glass is not reflecting the outside world, but opening into something else. The light inside it feels larger, not in size, but in presence, as if what is seen in the reflection is only a small part of something far greater. The villager remains still. The breath continues, slow, even. The body does not move, but awareness shifts fully toward the reflection. The lantern outside remains, unchanged, but it begins to feel less real, less complete, as if it is only an outline of something that exists somewhere else. The path remains empty, but now it feels like it cannot reach the lantern at all, no matter how far it extends, no matter how many steps are taken, because the lantern is not at the end of the path. It is somewhere else entirely. The villagers feel this more clearly now. The understanding grows, not through thought, not through explanation, but through stillness, through simply being without moving. The clearing feels quieter, almost distant. The lantern stands, but it no longer holds the same weight. The reflection becomes the focus, not chosen, not decided, but naturally, as if awareness itself has shifted. The villager slowly raises a hand toward the window, not touching, not reaching fully, but moving just enough to feel the presence of the glass. The light within it does not react. It does not flicker. It does not change, but it feels closer. The distance between the villager and the light feels smaller, not because of movement, but because of awareness. The breath deepens slightly, still calm, still quiet, but more present. The silence remains, but now it feels like it holds something beyond the world, something beyond the clearing, something beyond the lantern itself. The lantern remains, unmoving, silent, still glowing in the clearing, exactly where it has always stood. And yet, it no longer feels distant. It no longer feels separate. It no longer feels like something that exists outside the village. Something has changed, not in the world, but in the way the world is held. The first villager stands behind the window, body still, breath slow, eyes resting gently on the reflection, not the lantern itself, because now the reflection feels closer, more present, more real, The light within the glass does not behave like something far away. It does not feel like an image. It does not feel like something that belongs to the outside. It feels immediate, as if the distance between the villager and the lantern no longer exists. The clearing remains empty. The path remains untouched. The night remains silent. And yet, the idea of distance begins to dissolve. The lantern outside does not move, but it feels less important, less complete, as if it is only a surface of something deeper. The reflection in the window holds that depth, not as something hidden, not as something concealed, but as something that cannot exist anywhere else. The villager does not reach forward, does not step closer, because there is no need. The light is already here. The villagers feel this, each one within their own quiet space, behind closed doors, behind darkened windows, without speaking, without looking directly. The understanding spreads, not through movement, not through sound, but through stillness. The lantern is not far away. It is not at the end of the path. It is not in the clearing. It is here, not in place, but in presence. The air feels different now, not thicker, not heavier, but closer, as if the space between everything has gently folded inward. The silence deepens, but not into darkness, into clarity, a quiet clarity where nothing needs to be followed, because nothing is separate. The villager slowly breathes in. The breath does not feel like something entering the body. It feels like something already present, becoming slightly more noticeable. The light does not respond. It does not change, but it feels connected, as if it exists within the same space as the breath itself. The reflection in the window becomes deeper, not visually, but in feeling, as if the glass is no longer a surface, but a boundary that no longer holds. The villager's gaze softens, not focusing, not searching, simply resting within the presence of the light. The lantern outside continues to glow, but it no longer feels like the source. It feels like a shadow of something that exists more fully somewhere else. The path loses meaning, not disappearing, but no longer leading anywhere. The clearing loses importance, not fading, but no longer holding the center. Everything shifts, without movement, without change, without effort. The light exists without distance. The villagers feel it, not as something they reach, but as something they already are within. The breath continues, the silence continues, the presence continues, and the light remains, not outside, not inside, not near, not far, simply here. The villager slowly closes their eyes, not to leave the moment, but to remain within it without distraction. The light does not disappear. It does not dim. It does not move. It remains exactly as it is, and yet it feels closer than ever. The sense of direction fades. There is no longer a place to go, no longer a path to follow, no longer a distance to cross. Everything exists within the same quiet space. The lantern does not guide. It does not call. It does not show the way, because there is no way. There is only presence. The villagers remain still, but now they are not watching something. They are within it. The light does not belong to the clearing. It does not belong to the lantern. It does not belong to the night. It exists without belonging. The reflection holds it, but not as an image, as something that cannot exist anywhere else. The villager opens their eyes again. Slowly, gently, the window remains. The reflection remains. The light remains. But everything feels closer, more complete, more real. The lantern outside stands exactly where it has always stood, and yet it no longer feels like something to approach, because there is nothing to approach. The light is not somewhere else. The light remains, unchanged, soft, endless. It does not move. It does not fade. It does not grow. And yet, everything around it feels as though it has shifted. The lantern still stands in the clearing. The village still rests in silence. The path still winds between the houses. And yet, the sense of where things are begins to lose its meaning. The first villager stands behind the window, still, calm, present. The glass remains between them and the night outside. And yet, it no longer feels like something that separates. The reflection in the window holds the light, but it no longer feels like a reflection. Feels real, not more real than the lantern, not less real, but the same. The villager does not question this, does not try to understand, because there is nothing to resolve. The difference between inside and outside begins to soften, not disappearing, not breaking, but becoming less important. The house feels quiet. The air inside remains still, and yet it feels no different from the air outside. The same calm, the same presence, the same silence. The villager breathes slowly, and the breath no longer feels like something that moves through the body. It feels like something that exists everywhere. At once, the lantern remains, but it no longer feels like it stands in the clearing. It no longer feels like it belongs to the outside. It exists without location. The path fades in meaning, not disappearing, but no longer leading from one place to another, because the idea of place begins to soften. The clearing remains, but it no longer feels separate from the house. The distance between them no longer holds. The villager's hand rests at their side, not reaching, not moving, and yet it feels as though it is no further from the lantern than the air itself. The silence deepens, not heavier, not darker, but more complete, as if everything that once created separation has gently dissolved. The villagers feel this, each one within their own quiet space. No doors open, no one steps outside, and yet it feels as though no one is inside either. The idea of inside begins to lose meaning. The idea of outside fades with it. Only presence remains. The lantern glows, but it no longer lights a place. It exists as something that does not need a place. The reflection holds it, but not as an image, as something that exists equally wherever it is perceived. The villager closes their eyes, slowly, gently, and the light does not disappear. It remains, not in front, not outside, but present, the same, unchanged. The breath continues, but it no longer belongs to the body. It no longer moves in or out. It exists as part of everything. The silence holds, the presence remains, and the difference between what is seen and what is felt begins to disappear. The villager opens their eyes again. Nothing has changed. The house remains. The window remains. The clearing remains. The lantern remains. And yet, everything feels different. The glass is no longer a boundary. The walls are no longer limits. The space is no longer divided. Everything exists within the same quiet field. The villagers remain still, but they are no longer watching something outside of themselves. They are within it. The light does not belong to the lantern. It does not belong to the reflection. It exists without belonging. The path no longer leads outward. The clearing no longer lies beyond. The world no longer extends in directions. Everything exists here, not in place, but in presence. The villager stands quietly. No movement, no thought, no need to act, because there is nothing to reach, nothing to approach, nothing to cross. The lantern does not guide, because there is no distance. The silence does not surround, because there is no outside. The breath does not move, because there is no inside. Everything has become the same, not merged, not combined, but never truly separate. The world remains, the forms remain, the shapes remain, but their meaning has changed. The difference between things has softened. The space between things has faded. The light remains, unchanged, soft, endless, and yet it no longer feels like something that exists anywhere. Not in the clearing, not within the lantern, not within the reflection, not inside, not outside. It simply is. The village remains. The houses stand. The paths wind gently between them. The windows rest in silence. But the meaning of all these things begins to soften, not disappearing, not fading, but becoming less defined. The first villager stands where they are, still, calm, present, and yet no longer feels like someone standing in a place. The sense of position fades, not removed, but no longer needed. The floor beneath their feet does not hold them. The walls around them do not contain them. The space does not separate them from anything. Everything exists within the same quiet presence. The lantern continues to glow, but it is no longer something that can be located. It does not exist far away. It does not exist nearby. It does not exist somewhere. It exists without place. The reflection remains, but it no longer reflects. It does not mirror anything. It does not show something else. It reveals the same presence in a different way. The villager does not move, does not react, because there is nothing to respond to. The light is not outside. The light is not inside. The light is not distant. The light is not near. The idea of distance itself begins to dissolve. The air feels the same everywhere. The silence feels the same everywhere. The presence feels the same everywhere. The villagers remain, but they are no longer separate from each other. They are no longer separate from the houses. They are no longer separate from the light. Everything exists as one quiet field without division. The breath continues, but it is no longer something that happens within the body. It exists without direction, without movement, without beginning or end. The silence deepens, but it is no longer silence in the way it once was. It is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of everything without interruption. Nothing stands apart from it. Nothing moves against it. Nothing needs to. The lantern does not flicker. It does not change. And yet, it no longer feels like a source, because there is nothing else to be illuminated. The idea of light and dark begins to lose its meaning. Everything is present. Everything is calm. Everything simply exists. The villager closes their eyes again, and nothing disappears, nothing fades, nothing changes, because there is no longer a difference between what is seen and what is not. The light remains the same, unmoving, endless. The village remains the same, unchanged, soft, but the sense of being within it fades, not disappearing, but becoming something else, something that no longer needs to be placed. The path no longer leads. The clearing no longer exists elsewhere. The house no longer contains. Everything has become the same space, not joined, not merged, but never separate to begin with. The villager no longer feels like someone who observes. They no longer feel like someone who experiences. They simply exist as part of the same quiet presence. The light continues, but it is no longer something that can be followed, because there is no direction, no path, no distance, only presence. The villagers remain, but they no longer feel like many. They feel like something else, something beyond number, beyond identity, beyond separation. The breath continues, but it is no longer something that belongs to anyone. It exists without owner. The silence continues, but it is no longer something that surrounds. It exists without boundary. The light continues, but it is no longer something that shines. It exists without source. Everything has become something else, something that does not need to be understood, something that does not need to be described, something that simply is. The villager opens their eyes, and nothing changes. The lantern remains, the house remains, the village remains, and yet none of it feels separate. The light remains, and yet it no longer feels the same, not because it changes, not because it fades, but because the need for it begins to soften. The village is still there, the houses remain, the lantern exists, the path rests, and yet none of it holds its shape in the same way. The outlines begin to loosen, not disappearing, not vanishing, but becoming less certain. The edges that once separated one thing from another begin to blur. The walls no longer define the houses. The windows no longer separate inside from outside. The ground no longer supports. The sky no longer stretches. Everything exists without boundary. The first villager is still present, and yet no longer feels like a figure, no longer feels like something that stands, no longer feels like something that exists within a place. Only awareness remains, soft, endless, without direction. The light continues, but it no longer feels like something that shines. It no longer feels like something that exists in contrast to darkness, because darkness no longer exists, not as absence, not as space, not as something separate. Everything exists within the same quiet presence. The lantern remains, but it is no longer a lantern. The shape softens, the form fades, the idea of an object begins to disappear. The glow continues, but it is no longer contained. It is no longer held within glass. It is no longer framed. It simply exists. The reflection no longer reflects, because there is nothing left to mirror. There is no inside, no outside, no above, no below, only presence. The villagers no longer feel like many. They no longer feel like one. They no longer feel like anything that can be counted. Only awareness remains, without identity, without boundary, without form. The breath continues, but it is no longer something that can be followed. It does not rise. It does not fall. It does not begin. It does not end. It simply exists everywhere, at once. The silence deepens, but it is no longer silence, because silence only exists when something could break it. And now nothing can. Nothing stands apart. Nothing exists outside. Everything is already within it. The idea of space dissolves, not shrinking, not expanding, but becoming unnecessary. There is no distance, no direction, no location. Everything exists without needing to be placed. The idea of time dissolves. No before, no after, no moment passing into another. Only this, only presence, unchanging, endless, complete. The light begins to soften, not dim, not fading, but becoming less distinct, as if it no longer needs to be recognized, as if it no longer needs to exist as something separate. The villagers, or what once felt like villagers, no longer feel like anything at all, not because they are gone, but because the need to be something has disappeared. The world dissolves, not disappearing, not ending, but becoming something else, something without form, something without structure, something without need. The lantern no longer exists, not as an object, not as a source, but the presence remains, the same quiet presence that has always been here. The houses no longer stand, the path no longer wins, the clearing no longer opens. Everything that once created the idea of a place fades into something that does not require place at all. The light continues, but it is no longer light. It is no longer something that can be seen. It is something else, something deeper, something quieter, something that does not need to be noticed. The breath remains, but it is no longer felt. The silence remains, but it is no longer recognized. Everything that once created experience begins to soften and fade. The quiet remains. It has not changed. It has not deepened. It has not faded, because there was never anything outside of it. And yet, within that quiet, something begins to appear again. Not suddenly, not clearly, but gently, as if something that was never gone is slowly being remembered. There is no moment where it begins, no point where something returns, only a soft sense that something exists within the endless calm. First, it is nothing, only presence, only quiet, only something that cannot be named. And then something shifts, not movement, not sound, but awareness, a faint sense that something could be seen again, not clearly, not fully, but enough to be felt. The idea of form begins to return, not as shape, not as structure, but as suggestion, a soft outline that does not define, but exists. The light returns first, not as brightness, not as glow, but as presence, a faint sense of something that once felt like light, now existing again within the quiet. It does not shine, it does not spread, it simply appears. The village does not return, not yet, but something begins to resemble it, not clearly, not completely, but softly. The idea of space begins to form, not distance, not direction, but something that feels like openness. The idea of above and below begins to exist again, but only faintly, without separation, without boundary. The breath returns, not as movement, not as rhythm, but as something that can almost be felt, a quiet presence that exists within everything. The silence remains, but it feels different, not broken, not reduced, but shared with something that now exists within it. The shapes begin to form, not solid, not clear, but visible in the softest way. The lantern does not appear, but the idea of it begins to return, a faint presence where something once stood. The clearing does not open, but something feels like space within the quiet. The villagers do not appear, but awareness begins to gather, as if something is beginning to observe again. Not separate, not individual, but forming. The light becomes slightly more noticeable, still not shining, still not moving, but present in a way that can now be felt more clearly. The idea of direction begins to return, not strongly, not completely, but enough to create the sense that something exists somewhere. The difference between here and there begins to form, but remains soft, uncertain, unnecessary. The breath continues, now more present, still calm, still endless. The silence continues, now lighter, still complete, still unbroken. The forms continue to grow, not quickly, not clearly, but gently. The outlines of something begin to exist, not defined, not separated, but present. The lantern becomes a little more real, not visible, but felt. The idea of its glow begins to take shape again. The clearing begins to feel like a place, not fully formed, but present. The path begins to exist, not leading, not guiding, but forming. The villagers begin to return, not as figures, not as bodies, but as presence, a quiet sense that something is there. The world does not rebuild. It does not return to what it was. It becomes something else, something softer, something quieter, something that exists within. The quiet remains, unbroken, endless, soft, and yet, within that quiet, the world continues to return. Not suddenly, not completely, but gently, as if something that was never gone is simply becoming visible again. The shapes grow clearer. The faint outlines that once barely existed begin to settle into something that can be recognized. Not sharply, not fully, but enough to be felt. The village begins to appear, not as a place, not as a structure, but as presence taking form. The houses stand, soft at first, their edges blurred, their walls not yet solid, and yet they exist, resting within the same quiet that holds everything. The roofs form slowly, their lines becoming easier to follow, their shapes becoming more certain, but still gentle, still calm, still part of everything around them. The windows appear, dark, still, not reflecting, not glowing, but present. The doors remain closed, unmoving, without purpose, without need, and yet complete. The ground begins to feel more real, not heavy, not solid, but present enough to create the sense of standing. The space beneath everything becomes clearer. The sky begins to return, not distant, not above, but open, soft, endless, without boundary. The difference between space and form begins to exist again, but remains gentle, uncertain, connected. The lantern begins to form, not fully, not clearly, but its presence becomes stronger. The shape of it appears, the tall metal frame, the glass that holds something within it, the faint idea of light, still soft, still not shining, but present. The clearing opens, not suddenly, but gradually. The space around the lantern becomes visible, a soft emptiness that feels like ground without being defined. The path begins to return, winding gently through the village, still not leading anywhere, still not guiding, but forming. The villagers begin to appear, not fully, not as separate figures, but as presence gathering into shape. Soft outlines, quiet forms, standing within the village, not moving, not acting, but existing. The first villager begins to form, not clearly, not fully, but present, a sense of being something, not identity, not self, but awareness taking form. The breath becomes clearer, still calm, still slow, but now gently felt, a quiet rhythm that exists within everything. The silence remains, but it feels lighter, not reduced, not broken, but shared with the world that now exists within it. The light within the lantern becomes slightly stronger, still soft, still contained, but visible. The glow does not spread. It does not illuminate the clearing. It remains within itself. But now, it can be seen. The reflection begins to return. Not fully, not clearly, but gently. The surface of the window begins to hold the light again. The depth begins to form. The sense of inside and outside begins to exist, but remains soft. The villagers stand quietly, more present now, more defined, but still calm, still connected, still part of the same quiet presence. The first villager stands near the window, not fully visible, but clearly there, aware, present, watching without focusing. The path becomes clearer. The houses become more defined. The lantern becomes more real. The clearing becomes more open. The world continues to form, not rushing, not forcing, but unfolding slowly, gently within the quiet. The light remains, still soft, still calm, still contained. The breath continues. The silence continues. The presence continues. Everything exists as both form and quiet. The village is now visible, not fully solid, not completely separate, but present. The lantern stands in the clearing. The path leads toward it. The villagers remain within their places. And yet, nothing feels separate. Nothing feels distant. Everything remains connected, held within the same endless calm. The first villager stands still, breath steady, awareness soft. The light reflects in the window, and for a moment, everything feels exactly as it was before, and yet different, because now the quiet remains within everything, not beneath it, not beyond it, but as part of it. The world has returned, but not as it was, as something softer, something calmer, something that exists without leaving the stillness behind. The lantern glows, the village rests, the night holds everything, and within that quiet, the village remains, soft, still, present. The houses stand clearly now. The path winds gently between them. The clearing rests at the edge, and the lantern stands where it has always stood, glowing, quiet, contained. And yet, something has changed, not in form, not in shape, not in the way the world appears, but in the way it feels. The first villager stands near the window, breath slow, body calm, eyes open, resting somewhere between the lantern and the reflection that holds it. The light continues to glow, unmoving, unchanging, but now it feels different, not closer, not brighter, but aware, as if the light itself is not only being seen, but is also seeing. The villager does not react, does not step back, does not move, but something within them notices, not with thought, not with fear, but with quiet recognition, the sense that the light is not only present, but aware of presence. The clearing remains empty, the path remains untouched, the village remains still, and yet the silence feels different, not deeper, not heavier, but more focused, as if everything is centered around the same quiet awareness. The villagers feel it, without speaking, without turning, without even looking directly. The understanding spreads. The lantern is not just glowing, it is watching, not in a way that follows movement, not in a way that observes actions, but in a way that exists alongside awareness itself. The first villager's breath deepens slightly, still calm, still slow, but more present. The reflection in the window shifts, not visually, not clearly, but in feeling. The light within the glass feels more alive, more complete, as if it holds something beyond what can be seen. The villager does not move closer, does not reach, because there is no need. The light is already here. The path begins to feel different again, not leading, not guiding, but existing as something that could be taken. The bridge does not exist in this place, but the idea of crossing begins to form, not strongly, not clearly, but gently, the sense that something could be approached, even if it never is. The villagers remain still, but the stillness now holds something more: awareness, presence, observation, not from them, but from the light itself. The lantern continues to glow, unchanged, and yet it no longer feels passive. It no longer feels like something that simply exists, feels aware. The first villager slowly lowers their gaze, not away, but inward, as if the awareness of the light has turned something within them. The breath continues, the silence continues, the presence continues, and the light remains, watching, not as something separate, not as something outside, but as something that exists within the same space. The villagers feel it more clearly now, the sense that the light is not located, not placed, not distant. It exists everywhere, and because of that, it sees everything, not in detail, not in focus, but in presence. The idea of being observed does not create fear. It does not create tension. It creates stillness, a deeper stillness, a stillness that does not move because it is already fully seen. The first villager remains still, but something within them becomes clearer. The sense of self and the sense of the light begin to feel the same, not merged, not combined, but not separate. The reflection in the window deepens again, not showing more, but feeling more. The light does not flicker, it does not respond, but it remains as if it knows. The path remains empty, the clearing remains silent, the houses remain still, and yet everything feels observed, not by something outside, but by something that exists within everything. The breath continues, the silence continues, the awareness continues, and the light continues to watch, not waiting, not expecting, not following, simply existing as presence aware of itself within everything. The first villager does not move, but something within them settles. The need to understand fades. The need to follow fades. The need to act fades. Only presence remains, shared between the villager, the village, and the light. The lantern glows, the world rests, and within that quiet, the light remains, watching without ever needing to be seen. The lantern continues to glow, unchanged, silent, softly contained within itself. And yet, something begins to feel different, not in the light, not in the village, not in the stillness that holds everything, but in the distance. The space between the villager and the lantern begins to soften. The first villager stands where they have always stood, near the window, breath slow, body still, eyes open, resting gently on the presence of the light. The reflection in the glass holds it, quietly, deeply, and now it feels closer, not visibly, not in shape, but in presence. The villager does not move, does not step forward, and yet the distance feels smaller. The clearing remains where it is. The path still stretches between the houses, The lantern still stands alone. And yet, none of these things feel separate anymore. The air grows softer, not thicker, not warmer, but closer, as if space itself has begun to fold inward without movement, without sound. The silence deepens, but not into darkness, into clarity, a quiet clarity where everything feels more immediate, more present, more here. The villagers feel it, each one, within their own quiet place. No one steps outside, no door opens, no voice speaks, and yet, the same awareness spreads. The lantern is no longer far away. It is not at the edge of the village. It is not in the clearing. It is closer. The path begins to feel shorter, not in distance, but in meaning, as if the idea of walking toward the lantern is no longer needed. The first villager breathes in, slowly, gently, and the breath does not feel like something that moves through the body. It feels like something that exists between the villager and the light, a shared space, a shared presence. The reflection deepens again. The lantern within the glass feels more real, more complete, as if it exists more fully there than anywhere else. The villager does not reach out, does not touch the glass, because something within them understands that there is nothing to reach. The light is already here. The clearing begins to lose its importance. The ground beneath the lantern no longer feels like a place. The air around it no longer feels like space. Everything that once created distance begins to dissolve. The villagers remain still, but now they feel closer to something, not to the lantern itself, but to what it represents. The light does not move, it does not approach, and yet it feels as though it is coming nearer, not through space, not through motion, but through awareness. The first villager lowers their gaze slightly, not away, but inward, as if the presence of the light is no longer something outside, but something within. The breath deepens, still calm, still slow, but more connected. The silence remains, but it now holds something more, a quiet tension, not uncomfortable, not urgent, but present. The sense that something is about to happen. Even though nothing moves, the path remains empty. The clearing remains silent. The lantern remains unchanged. And yet, the moment feels closer to something. Something that has not yet happened, but already exists. The villagers feel it. A quiet awareness spreading through the stillness. The understanding that the light is not something to approach, but something that is already arriving. The first villager does not move, but something within them shifts, not physically, not visibly, but in presence. The sense of being separate begins to fade. The sense of being here and the light being there begins to dissolve. The reflection holds everything. The villager, the light, the space between, all existing within the same quiet surface. The glass is no longer a boundary. The wall is no longer a limit. The world is no longer divided. Everything exists within the same presence. The lantern glows, unchanged, and yet it feels closer than ever, not because it has moved, but because the idea of distance has disappeared. The breath continues, the silence continues, the awareness continues, and the moment continues to deepen, not forward, not into time, but inward, into something that cannot be reached by movement. The first villager remains still. The villagers remain silent. The village remains calm, and the light continues to feel closer, without ever moving at all, as if it is not coming from somewhere else, but revealing that it has always been here, waiting to be noticed when nothing else remains to be followed. The light remains, soft, unmoving, unchanged, and yet it no longer feels like something that exists outside. The lantern still stands in the clearing. The path still lies between the houses. The village still rests in silence. And yet, none of it feels separate anymore. The first villager stands by the window, still, calm, present. The glass reflects the lantern, but now, the reflection feels more real than the world beyond it. The light within the glass does not feel distant. It does not feel like something seen. It feels like something that is already here. The villager does not move, does not reach, does not step closer, and yet something shifts, not in the world, but in the way the world is held. The space between inside and outside begins to dissolve, not breaking, not disappearing, but softening. The air within the house feels the same as the air outside. The silence feels the same everywhere. The presence feels the same everywhere. The lantern does not approach. It does not move, and yet it no longer feels far away. The reflection deepens. The glass no longer feels like a surface. It feels like an opening, not into another place, but into the same presence, seen differently. The villager slowly breathes in. The breath feels connected to the light, not separate, not moving toward it, but existing within the same space. The villagers feel it, each one, within their own stillness. No doors open, no footsteps sound, and yet, something has already changed. The light is no longer outside. It is no longer in the clearing. It is no longer somewhere else. It exists within everything. The first villager lowers their gaze, not away, but inward. The reflection remains, but it no longer reflects the lantern. It reveals something deeper, something that cannot be located, something that cannot be reached by walking. The path begins to lose its meaning, not disappearing, but no longer leading. The clearing begins to fade in importance, not vanishing, but no longer holding the center. The lantern remains, but it is no longer the source. The light exists beyond it. The breath continues, slow, even, but now it feels shared, not belonging to the body, not separate from the world. The silence deepens, but not into emptiness, into fullness, a quiet fullness where nothing stands apart. The villager does not move, but something within them becomes still, in a deeper way, not stillness of the body, but stillness of separation. The sense of being inside fades. The sense of the lantern being outside fades. Only presence remains. The reflection holds everything. The villager, the light, the space between, all existing within the same quiet field. The glass is no longer a boundary. The walls are no longer limits. The world is no longer divided. The lantern glows, but it is no longer something that can be approached, because it is already here. The villagers remain still, but now they are not watching something. They are within it. The light exists without distance, without direction, without place. The breath continues. The silence continues. The awareness continues. And the moment continues to deepen, not forward, not into time, but inward, into something that cannot be reached by movement. The first villager remains where they are, and yet it no longer feels like a place. The village remains, and yet it no longer feels like a location. The lantern remains, and yet it no longer feels like an object. Everything exists without needing to be defined. The reflection fades into presence. The presence fades into awareness. The awareness remains, soft, endless, unbroken. The light does not leave the clearing, but it no longer stays there either. It exists everywhere, at once. The villagers feel it fully now, not as something they see, not as something they follow, but as something they are within. The breath slows further. The silence becomes complete. The world becomes still. And within that stillness, the light no longer stays outside, because there is no outside left at all. The light remains, soft, endless, unmoving, and yet it no longer feels like something that exists anywhere in particular. The lantern still stands in the clearing. The house still holds its quiet shape. The window still rests between what once felt like inside and outside. And yet, none of these things hold their meaning anymore. The first villager stands where they are, still, calm, present, but no longer feels like someone standing in a place. The sense of position fades, not disappearing, but becoming unnecessary. The floor beneath their feet does not define where they are. The walls around them do not separate them from anything. The space beyond the window no longer feels different. Everything exists within the same quiet presence. The reflection in the glass remains, but it no longer reflects. It no longer mirrors something outside. It exists as something that is the same as everything else. The lantern continues to glow, but it is no longer something to look toward. It is no longer something that exists at a distance. It is no longer something that can be reached, because it is already here. The clearing remains, but it no longer exists somewhere else. The path remains, but it no longer leads. The house remains, but it no longer contains. Everything that once created separation has softened, not broken, not removed, but no longer needed. The villagers remain, but they are no longer many. They are no longer separate. They are no longer located. They exist as the same presence, appearing in many forms without ever becoming divided. The breath continues, but it no longer belongs to the body. It no longer moves in or out. It exists everywhere at once. The silence deepens, but it is no longer silence, because silence only exists when something could break it. And now nothing can. Nothing stands apart. Nothing exists outside. Everything is already within it. The light continues, but it is no longer something that shines, because there is nothing to illuminate. Everything is already present. The lantern remains, but it is no longer the source. It is no longer the center. It is simply part of the same quiet whole. The reflection remains, but it is no longer different from what it once reflected. The difference between image and reality dissolves. The villager does not move, but something within them settles completely. The sense of being separate fades. The sense of being somewhere fades. Only presence remains. The village exists, but not as a place. The lantern exists, but not as an object. The path exists, but not as something to follow. Everything exists without needing to be anything. The air feels the same everywhere. The light feels the same everywhere. The presence feels the same everywhere. There is no inside, no outside, no distance, no direction, only this. The breath slows, the silence holds, the awareness remains, and the light continues, not somewhere, not anywhere, but simply as everything. The villagers feel it fully now, not as something they observe, but as something they are within. The idea of the world softens, not disappearing, but losing its boundaries. The houses no longer separate space. The paths no longer define movement. The clearing no longer marks a location. Everything is present within the same quiet field. The villager closes their eyes, and nothing changes, because there is no difference between seeing and not seeing. The light remains, the presence remains, the stillness remains, the world remains, and yet none of it exists in the way it once did, because now there is no outside anymore, nothing beyond, nothing separate, nothing distant, only something that exists without division, without boundary, without need. The breath continues, the silence continues, the presence continues, and within that presence, everything that once felt apart has already become one, not joined, not merged, but never separate to begin with. The light remains, the village remains, the moment remains, and nothing exists outside of it anymore. The stillness remains, unchanged, endless, complete. Nothing has been lost, nothing has been gained, because there was never anything outside of it. And yet, something settles, not movement, not change, but a quiet stability, as if everything that once needed to become has now come to rest. The village remains, but no longer as a place. The houses remain, but no longer as structures. The lantern remains, but no longer as something that stands apart. Everything exists within the same presence, without division, without boundary, without distance. The first villager remains, but not as someone standing, not as someone watching, not as someone within a world. Only awareness remains, soft, still, unbroken. The breath continues, but it is no longer something that moves. It is no longer something that begins or ends. It exists everywhere at once. The silence remains, but it is no longer silence in contrast to sound. It is the presence of everything without interruption. Nothing stands outside of it. Nothing moves against it. Nothing needs to. The light remains, but it is no longer light. Not something that shines, not something that glows. It is simply presence. The same presence that holds everything. The lantern does not disappear, but it is no longer a source. The clearing does not fade, but it is no longer a location. The path does not vanish, but it no longer leads. Everything remains without needing to be anything. The world does not move, not slowed, not stopped, but unnecessary. Time no longer passes, not because it has ended, but because nothing requires it. The idea of before fades. The idea of after fades. Only this remains, only presence. The villagers remain, but they are no longer many. They are no longer one. They are something beyond number, beyond identity, beyond form. The sense of being someone dissolves, not disappearing, but becoming irrelevant. There is no need to be, no need to exist in a particular way. Everything is already complete, already whole, already beyond change. The air remains, but it does not surround. The ground remains, but it does not hold. The sky remains, but it does not stretch. Everything exists without needing function, without needing purpose, without needing to be understood. The stillness does not deepen. It does not expand. It does not shift, because it has always been this. Everything that once appeared has simply settled into it. The village remains. The lantern remains. The moment remains. But none of it exists as separate things. They exist as one quiet presence holding itself without effort. The breath continues. The silence continues. The awareness continues. And within that, there is no movement, no direction, no need to follow, no need to understand, because everything that once felt distant, everything that once felt separate, everything that once felt unfinished, has already become something else, something that does not need to change, something that does not need to move, something that does not need to exist in the way it once did. The stillness remains, not as something that stays, but as something that has never left. And within that stillness, nothing begins, nothing ends, nothing continues, because everything already is. The stillness remains, unbroken, endless, complete. It has not changed. It has not moved. It has not become something else. And yet, within that stillness, something begins to appear. Not suddenly, not clearly, not as something that arrives, but as something that was always there, gently becoming visible again. There is no beginning, no moment where it starts, only a quiet sense that something exists within the endless calm. First, it is almost nothing, only presence, only awareness, only something that cannot be named. And then, something soft begins to form, not a shape, not a structure, but a suggestion, a faint outline that does not separate, but exists. The stillness does not break. It does not open. It does not shift. It simply allows. The first trace of form appears within it, not outside of it, not apart from it, but within it, as if stillness itself is remembering how to appear. The light returns first, not as brightness, not as glow, but as a quiet presence, something that feels like light without shining, something that exists without illuminating. It does not spread. It does not move. It simply is. The breath remains, still endless, still unmoving, and yet it now feels slightly more present. Not stronger, not deeper, but noticeable. The silence remains, but it feels different. Not broken, not reduced, but shared. Shared with something that now exists within it. The first shape begins to form, not clearly, not fully, but gently, a soft impression that begins to resemble something. Not a house, not a lantern, not a villager, but something that could become one. The edges are not defined. The boundaries do not exist. The form does not separate from the space around it. It simply appears within the same quiet presence. The stillness holds it, without effort, without change, without resistance. More shapes begin to follow, not quickly, not fully, but slowly, gently, as if something is being remembered without being recreated. The idea of space begins to return, not distance, not direction, but openness, a sense that something exists within something else. The idea of above and below begins to form, but remains soft, without separation, without structure. The light becomes slightly more noticeable, still not shining, still not moving, but present, a quiet presence within the forming shapes. The breath continues, now gently felt. The silence continues, now gently shared. The shapes begin to resemble something, not clearly, but enough to be felt. The suggestion of walls, the suggestion of ground, the suggestion of something that could be a place. But nothing is solid, nothing is separate. Everything remains connected. Everything remains within the same calm. The first villager begins to return, not as a body, not as a form, but as awareness gathering, a quiet sense of being something, not identity, not self, but presence taking shape. The stillness does not leave. It remains beneath everything, within everything. As everything, the world begins to form again, but not as it was, not as something separate, but as something that exists within the stillness itself. The lantern begins to return, not clearly, not fully, but as a presence, a soft shape where something once stood. The clearing begins to form, not open, not defined, but present. The path begins to appear, not leading, not guiding, but existing. The village begins to remember itself, not rebuilding, not returning, but forming from within the quiet. The houses take shape, soft, blurred, connected. The windows appear, the doors exist, but nothing separates, nothing divides. Everything remains one. The light continues, still soft, still calm, still contained. The reflection begins to return, not fully, but gently, a surface that holds the light without separating it. The first villager becomes more present, not fully formed, but clearly there, aware, still, calm. The breath continues, the silence continues, the presence continues. Everything exists as both form and stillness. The shapes grow clearer. The world becomes more visible, but nothing breaks, nothing rushes, nothing forces itself forward. Everything unfolds without leaving the calm. The lantern stands, the village rests, the path wins, the clearing opens, but all of it exists within the same endless quiet. The first villager stands, not separate, not apart, but present. The light remains, not outside, not inside, but everywhere, the stillness remains. Not beneath, not beyond. The stillness remains, unbroken, endless, present beneath everything, within everything, as everything. It has not changed. It has not moved. It has not become something else. And yet, within that stillness, the world continues to take shape, not as something new, not as something rebuilt, but as something that quietly appears without ever leaving what has always been there. The village begins to feel more present, not distant, not imagined, but gently, softly here. The shapes that once existed only as faint impressions begin to settle. The houses take form. Their walls begin to hold shape, though still soft, still without sharp edges. The lines of their structure become easier to follow, not rigid, not defined, but present. The roofs appear more clearly, sloping gently, resting above the walls without separating from the space around them. The wood, the stone, the texture, all exist without feeling heavy, without pressing into place. Everything rests, everything belongs. The windows return, dark, still, not reflecting, not glowing, but present as part of the whole. The doors remain closed, not as barriers, not as entrances, but as shapes that exist without purpose. The ground becomes more certain, not solid, not fixed, but enough to create the sense of standing. The idea of below begins to return, softly, without weight, without force. The sky opens, not above, not distant, but present as something that holds space without creating separation. The idea of above returns, but remains connected. The difference between space and form begins to exist again, but gently, without division. The path becomes clearer, winding slowly between the houses, its surface soft, unmarked, not leading, not guiding, but present. The clearing begins to open, not fully, not sharply, but as a quiet space where something stands. The lantern appears, soft at first, faint outline, presence, not yet fully formed, but clearly there. The shape becomes stronger. The metal frame rises gently. The glass holds something within it. The idea of light begins to return, still soft, still contained, but present. The glow appears, not bright, not spreading, but visible. The light remains within the lantern, as it always has. The villagers return, not suddenly, not completely, but gently, soft figures forming within the village, standing quietly, without movement, without action, but present. The first villager stands near the window, not fully defined, but clearly there. Awareness gathers, not identity, not thought, but presence taking form. The breath continues, now gently felt, a soft rhythm that exists without beginning, without end. The silence remains, but lighter, still complete, still unbroken, but now shared with the world that has appeared within it. The houses become clearer, the path becomes more visible, the lantern becomes more real, the clearing becomes more open, the villagers become more present, and yet nothing separates, nothing divides. Everything remains connected. Everything remains within the same stillness. The light continues to glow, soft, contained, unmoving. The reflection begins to return, a surface that holds the light without separating it. The sense of inside and outside begins to form, but remains soft, uncertain, connected. The first villager stands quietly, breath steady, awareness calm, watching without focusing. The village continues to form, but not as something separate from the stillness, as something within it, as something that never left it. The air feels calm, soft, present. The ground feels steady, gentle, certain. The sky feels open, endless, connected. Everything exists as both form and stillness. The lantern stands in the clearing. The path leads toward it. The villagers remain within their places, and yet nothing feels distant. Nothing feels apart. Everything remains held within the same endless calm. The first villager remains still. No movement, no need to move, only presence. The breath continues. The silence continues. The awareness continues. And the world continues to take shape without ever leaving the stillness that holds it all. The stillness remains, unbroken, endless, soft. It has not left. It has not changed. It continues to hold everything, quietly, gently, without effort. And yet, within that stillness, the world becomes clearer. Not suddenly, not completely, but slowly, as if something that was always present is simply allowing itself to be seen. The village now feels real, not distant, not imagined, but here. The houses stand more fully. Their walls hold shape, not rigidly, but gently, as if they are resting within the space around them. The texture of the stone becomes visible, soft, worn, timeless. The wooden beams stretch across the surfaces, darkened, quiet, steady. Nothing feels heavy. Nothing feels fixed. Everything rests without pressure. The roofs settle into place. Their lines now easier to follow. Their edges clearer, and yet still soft, still connected to the air around them. The windows remain dark, still, silent. They do not reflect. They do not glow, but they exist as part of the whole. The doors remain closed, not as barriers, not as entrances, but as forms that do not need to be used. The ground becomes more certain, still gentle, still calm, but now it holds the sense of standing. Not heavy, not solid, but present. The sky opens more fully, not above, not distant, but surrounding everything without creating separation. Soft, endless, without boundary. The air feels calm, still, holding everything without effort. The path becomes clearer, winding through the village, the surface smooth, unmarked, untouched. It does not call, it does not guide, but it exists as something that could be followed, without needing to be. The clearing opens, more fully now. The space around the lantern becomes visible, a quiet openness that feels like ground without being defined. The lantern stands, now clearly visible, this metal frame dark, its glass holding the soft glow within. The light remains contained. It does not spread. It does not illuminate the clearing. It simply exists within itself. The glow is steady, unchanging, soft. The reflection returns, not fully, but gently, a surface that holds the light without separating it. The villagers stand, now more present, soft figures within the village. They do not move, they do not speak, They do not act, but they exist, quietly, calmly, within the same stillness that holds everything. The first villager stands near the window, clear now, defined, but not separate. Their presence is calm, their breath slow, their awareness soft. The breath continues, now clearly felt, a gentle rhythm that does not begin and does not end. The silence remains, still complete, still unbroken, but now it feels shared with the world that has formed within it. The houses stand, the path rests, the clearing opens, the lantern glows, the villagers remain. Everything is here, everything is present, and yet nothing feels separate, nothing feels distant, nothing feels apart. Everything exists within the same quiet field. The light continues, soft, contained, unmoving. The reflection deepens, not visually, but in presence. The sense of inside and outside exists, but remains gentle, connected, uncertain. The first villager remains still, watching without focusing, feeling without reacting. The path feels more real. The ground feels more certain. The air feels more present. The world feels more visible. And yet, the stillness remains, holding everything, without change, without movement, without effort. The lantern does not call. It does not guide. It does not invite. And yet, it feels closer, not in distance, but in awareness. The clearing feels open, but not separate. The village feels present, but not divided. Everything exists as one. The breath continues. The silence continues. The awareness continues. The first villager does not move, but something within them settles. The world is here, fully, clearly, and yet nothing has changed. Nothing has begun. Nothing has returned. Everything has simply become visible within the same endless calm. The lantern glows. The stillness remains, soft, endless, unchanged. It holds the village, the lantern, the path, the air, everything, exactly as it is. Nothing has been disturbed. Nothing has shifted. And yet, within that stillness, something begins. Not suddenly, not clearly, but gently, as if movement itself is remembering how to exist without ever leaving the calm that holds it. The village stands. The houses remain. The windows rest in silence. The doors stay closed. The path winds through the space between them. The clearing opens, and the lantern continues to glow, soft, contained, unmoving. The light remains within itself. It does not spread. It does not reach. It simply exists. The villagers stand where they are, still, calm, present, not separate, not distant, only part of the same quiet field. The first villager stands near the window, breath slow, body relaxed, awareness soft. Nothing pulls, nothing calls, nothing demands, and yet something begins to form. Not movement, not yet, but the possibility of it. A quiet sense that something could happen, not as intention, not as decision, but as presence. The breath continues, slow, even, and within that breath, something feels slightly more alive. Not stronger, not faster, but present in a different way. The air feels closer, not heavier, not thicker, but aware, as if the space itself holds the moment more tightly. The lantern remains, unchanged, and yet it feels slightly nearer, not in distance, but in meaning. The path remains, untraveled, and yet It now feels like something that could be walked. The ground feels steady. The sky remains open. The silence remains complete. And within all of it, something continues to build. Quietly, gently, without force, the first villager shifts. Only slightly, so small that it almost cannot be seen. A soft adjustment of weight, a subtle change in balance, and then stillness again. Nothing follows, nothing reacts. The world remains as it is, and yet something has changed. Movement has entered, not as action, but as possibility. The villagers feel it, not with their eyes, not with thought, but within the same quiet awareness that connects everything. The breath deepens just slightly, still calm, still slow, but more present. The silence holds, but it now carries something within it, something that was not there before. The idea of motion. The path feels clearer. The lantern feels closer. The clearing feels more open. The world feels more real. And yet, nothing moves. The first villager remains still, but something within them shifts again. Not outward, not visible, but inward. The sense of standing becomes clearer. The sense of being here becomes stronger. The air feels more defined. The space feels more certain. The ground feels more present. The lantern glows, unchanging, and yet something about it feels different. Not in the light, not in the form, but in the way it is felt. As if it is no longer just something that exists, but something that allows. The path waits, not calling, not guiding, but present. The villagers remain still, but the stillness is no longer empty. It is full of something that has not yet happened, but already exists. The first villager leans forward, only slightly, barely noticeable. The shift is gentle, smooth, without effort, and then stillness again. The movement does not continue. The step does not follow. The moment holds, but the change remains. The possibility has grown. The awareness has deepened. The presence has shifted. The breath continues. The silence continues. The world continues. And within it, something has begun. Not as action, not as change, but as the quiet beginning of something that does not need to happen to exist. The lantern glows. The village rests. The path remains. And the movement remains within the stillness, waiting without waiting, present without needing to continue. The stillness remains, unbroken, soft, endless. It holds everything exactly where it is. The village stands. The houses rest. The path lies between them. The clearing opens, and the lantern continues to glow. Nothing has changed. Nothing has moved. And yet, something continues, not outward, not visible, but present within the same quiet field. The first villager remains near the window, still, calm, balanced. The breath flows gently, slow, even, uninterrupted. The silence remains complete, and yet, it now carries something more, a quiet tension, not heavy, not urgent, but present. The sense that something is about to happen. The shift that began before remains, not as movement, but as awareness. The idea of stepping forward exists, not as decision, not as intention, but as presence. The body does not move, and yet the feeling of movement is there. The weight shifts without shifting. The balance changes without change. Everything that leads to motion exists, except the motion itself. The path lies before the villager, soft, unmarked, waiting, not calling, not guiding, but present. The lantern remains, unchanged, its glow contained within itself, steady, calm, unmoving, and yet it feels closer, not in distance, but in awareness. The clearing holds it, the air surrounds it, but none of it feels separate. The villagers remain still, but they feel it, a quiet awareness spreading through the space, the sense that something is about to unfold, and yet nothing moves. The moment stretches, not in time, but in presence. The space before the step becomes deeper, more complete, as if it holds everything that could happen without needing anything to happen at all. The first villager leans forward, slightly more than before, barely noticeable. The body prepares. The ground feels steady. The air feels close. The breath becomes more present. And then, stillness. The movement pauses, not stopped, not interrupted, but held. The step exists, fully, completely, but not yet taken. The villagers feel it, each one, the same quiet awareness, the same presence, the same moment. The lantern glows, unchanged, and yet it feels like it knows, not observing, not reacting, but present in a way that holds the moment. The path feels closer. The ground feels more certain. The air feels more real. Everything feels more present. And yet, nothing changes. The silence holds. The breath continues. The awareness deepens. The first villager remains balanced between stillness and movement, between what is and what could be. The step remains, not delayed, not waiting, but existing within the moment. The idea of moving forward grows, not strongly, not clearly, but gently. The sense of direction returns, not as a path to follow, but as something that exists. The villagers remain still, but the stillness is no longer empty. It is full, full of potential, full of presence, full of something that has not yet happened, but already is. The lantern feels closer. The clearing feels more open. The path feels more real. The world feels more defined. And yet, the calm remains. Nothing breaks. Nothing rushes. Nothing forces itself forward. Everything remains exactly where it is. The first villager slowly returns to stillness. The slight forward lean fades. The balance settles. The body rests, but the step does not disappear. It remains, not as something that will happen, not as something that must happen, but as something that already exists. The moment holds, gently, endlessly, without pressure, without change. The villagers remain still. The houses remain quiet. The path remains soft. The lantern remains present. And the step remains, not taken, not completed, but fully real, fully present. Within the stillness, the breath continues, the silence continues, the awareness continues. And within that awareness, everything that could ever happen already exists before it ever begins. The stillness remains, unbroken, soft, endless. It has not moved. It has not changed. Continues to hold everything exactly as it is. The village stands. The houses rest. The path lies gently between them. The clearing opens, and the lantern continues to glow. Nothing appears different. Nothing seems altered. And yet, something happens. Not suddenly, not sharply, not in a way that disturbs the quiet, but gently, as if the moment itself allows something to continue. The first villager remains where they are, balanced, calm, present. The breath flows slowly, even, uninterrupted. The silence holds, complete, full, and within that silence, the step begins. Not as a decision, not as a choice, not as something that starts, but as something that continues from where it has always existed. The weight shifts, slightly, almost imperceptible. The balance changes. The body leans forward, just enough. The ground remains steady. The air remains still. Nothing reacts. Nothing resists. The foot lifts, slowly, gently, without sound, without effort, without tension. The movement is smooth, continuous, as if it has always been happening, even before it began. The villagers remain still. No one turns, no one moves, no one interrupts the moment, because nothing feels broken, nothing feels disturbed. Everything remains calm, everything remains whole, and yet, the movement continues. The foot moves forward, not quickly, not clearly, but steadily. The path remains, waiting, present. The lantern glows, unchanged. The clearing holds, silent. The air feels close. The breath feels deeper. The moment feels full. And then, the foot lowers, softly, gently, without sound, without impact. The step is taken, not sharply, not forcefully, but completely. The first movement fully realized. And yet, nothing breaks. The stillness remains. The silence remains. The calm remains. The world does not react. The village does not change. The lantern does not flicker. Everything is exactly as it was. And yet, something has shifted. The first villager now stands one step forward. Not far, not distant, but different. Not separate, not removed, but changed in a way that cannot be seen, but can be felt. The second step does not follow. Not yet. The body rests again, balanced, calm, present. The movement does not continue as motion, continues as awareness. The awareness that something has begun. The path feels closer. The lantern feels more present. The clearing feels deeper. The world feels more real. And yet, nothing rushes. Nothing pulls. Nothing demands. The villagers remain still, but they feel it. A quiet shift spreading through the space. The sense that something has changed without changing anything. The breath continues, now slightly deeper, still calm, still slow. The silence remains, still complete, still unbroken. But now it holds something more. The presence of movement, the presence of action, the presence of continuation. The first villager stands quietly. The step remains, not behind them, not in front of them, but part of them, part of the moment. The ground feels more certain. The air feels more present. The space feels slightly more defined. But the calm does not leave. It holds everything, including the movement, without resistance. The lantern remains, still waiting, still silent. But now it feels closer, not because the villager has moved far, but because the world itself has shifted. The path feels clearer. The clearing feels more open. The village feels more real. And yet, everything remains within the same quiet. The movement has not broken the stillness. It has not disturbed the calm. It has not changed the world. It has simply become part of it. The villagers remain still, but the stillness is no longer empty. It is full of presence, full of awareness, full of something that continues without needing to move again. The breath continues, the silence continues, the awareness continues, and the step remains, not as something finished, not as something completed, but as something that now exists within the world. A movement that did not break the calm, a change that did not disturb the stillness, a beginning that did not leave the moment. The lantern glows, the village rests, the path remains, and the world continues exactly as it is, holding both stillness and movement